thank you all for joining. Welcome to our first session in our Series A Bootcamp program. Today, we're going to dig into milestones and process at a high level. And the goal ultimately is for this to be helpful to you. And so in order to do that, you sharing your input is super valuable. So we can kind of continue to design this as we move forward. Otherwise, I'm going to share my screen. We've got a few slides for you today. And I'm going to hand it over to Lily, Jimmy, and Brian to kick things off.
Well, thank you, Claire. Can everyone hear me okay? Alrighty, cool. Well, why don't we dive in? I think Claire kind of gave this preface, but this is meant to be a safe, collaborative space. We can share specific stories or specific things and sort of what's worked, what's not, what's been hard, what's worked well. We have one perspective as investors, both in terms of our portfolio companies going on to raise successfully, and also, we invested directly in Series A's and have seen those processes. So we'll share our perspective, but this should be you guys can learn so much from each other, probably even more than us, because you're in it. All right. Well, Series A milestones. So I think, Jimmy, I'm going to let you spend some time on this as well. But I think from a macro perspective, like people always talk about sort of the 1 million ARR milestone, but I think that that's a little bit of a lazy benchmark that the industry sort of uses, and there's lots written about it. But I think what matters is what's underneath it. What does that really mean? And there's lots of different ways that the underlying traction can manifest and should manifest behind what the ARR threshold means. So that I think the ARR piece is kind of an output to a whole bunch of inputs that are relevant, and that's what investors are actually going to be dissecting underneath it. And I've seen cases where you have that ARR, but actually the underlying inputs aren't that great. Let's say it's 2 customers that are in pilots and not converted and not referenceable, but it's technically $1 million in ARR. I've seen those fall short, or vice versa. I've seen less ARR but repeatable, referenceable, great team. Let's start a couple of the other pieces that we'll talk about. So it's not a hard and fast rule. It is what's underneath it. Jimmy, do you want to kick us off on talking about some of these milestones?
Yeah, I think I think one of the things that's changed, kind of getting to the point of rounds have changed and round sizes have changed. I think the one thing that hasn't changed, sort of the immutable fact of the Series A, is it's about product market fit. And when we talk about product market fit, one way to measure product market fit is ARR levels. So you have a really big pain point in a market. People are willing to pay for your product. $1 million used to mean, hey, we have some level of scale. I think you can prove that you're in a really big market, you have some level of scale, you are solving a critical pain point for the market, and you're able to distribute the product and people are willing to sort of accept it and use it. And then you're able to gather feedback on their willingness to accept and use it. Now, some of that is a signed contract. So $1 million of ARR, yeah, that's great. But being able to understand who your target segment is and distribute and get your product in the hands of those customers and get them using it and getting their feedback, it doesn't always have to be with dollars. As long as you understand, have a lens into how you're going to monetize that sort of utilization of your product over time. That's what you really need to have sort of coalescing at this stage in your life. Product market fit, ability to distribute the product, understand how you're going to be able to predictably, reliably sort of, go to market, utilize your Series A dollars to sort of increase that level of distribution and monetization. And that's different for every company. So the things that are inputs into sort of product market fit and the stage that you typically see folks at are, do you have the team to address the problem? Is the market sufficiently large where not only can, the investor make venture size returns, but even absent that, is it something that is a pain point that is pervasive across your target customer set? And you've proven that you understand your unique angle in that place, in that market, and that you're going to be able to sort of charge for it. And customers are willing to pay because I heard this a while ago, you're a painkiller and not a vitamin. People want you to solve their pain. And if you are in the neighborhood of being able to solve that, and they get 10x the ROI on the dollars that they spend with you, that's perfect, right? They get 10x relief from the pain. And so having that level of understanding and being able to tell that through customer use cases or stories or NPS or feedback really goes a long way. Products at this stage, it'd be great if they were all technologically smooth and sound. I think you have to be able to talk about your product as your company and your approach, and identify things that, gaps you still need to solve. Some of you are bootstrapping, right? You haven't had the capital, but understanding where the product as a whole solves that pain and sort of what your roadmap is to get increasing value to your customers, and then increasingly monetize it. And then your go-to-market, go-to-market, I think, really is about distribution. It really is getting the product into the hands of the people that are going to use it, and then having early signs of willingness to pay. And these are all generalities. I mean, there are so many different, we can drill down on any single one of these and get sort of like strategic about like how you would do that, but all of your businesses are so different. But there are ways within each one of your businesses to sort of talk about what go-to-market motion works. And you probably have a sense of, what that is and how you're going to repeat that success over the next 12 to 18 months ahead of your B round.
Be curious for the group, as you think about sort of your own way to demonstrate product market fit, which pieces have you found hardest to think about, or where you have biggest questions around, or where maybe you've gotten pushback from investors? Like, what pieces of this part have been most challenging or confusing?
So we're not fundraising right now, but I'll jump in if that's cool. As I'm just trying to think about product market fit myself, is like when you actually, we have however many customers, we have a bunch of people coming to us. Does that mean we have product market fit? We've like, to me, it's just kind of it's a hard one to understand when. So I guess what I'm thinking is like the way I've kind of defined it myself is like having no customers churn is a big one. Yeah. But curious as to like how that, I don't know. It's like it seems like a very ambiguous thing to me, and so it's just a tough one to try and say like, okay, yes, we have it. I feel like it's like some combination of like very little to no churn and I don't know, like inbound interest in your company, maybe.
Yeah. One thing, and maybe Devaney, I'll call you, Brian. It might be useful. One thing that investors will do is talk to customers, and so to share a little light on sort of like, Brian, do you want to share sort of what are the top 3 things we're looking for in customer calls? Because I think I'll share from an investor perspective, that's one of the most compelling ways that we assess is their product market fit is talking to customers and how they answer some of our primary questions. Brian, I don't know if you want to chime in on sort of we ask a lot of things, but there's sort of 2 or 3 that matter most.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think going beyond that, like the revenue side of things is sort of this kind of lagging indicator, right? And at seed, you're looking for some leading indicators, and then at Series A, you're kind of looking for the lagging ones to catch up a little bit. And then, but you're still, your investors will still look for leading indicators. And part of that, Lily, to bring it back to talking to customers is, the things that we want to look for and that we ask about is, do you have something in the hands of a paying customer that they absolutely can't live without? And so we usually try to understand a before and after story. Tell me about, especially on the B2B side, tell me about how you were getting your job done before using this product, and tell me after. And we usually follow up that with what's becoming more and more standard of, scale of 1 to 10, how disappointed would you be if this goes away? And like what investors don't want to hear, and obviously you as founders don't want to hear, is like like a 3 or a 4. Like product market fit is, when people say, look, we'd be very disappointed if this went away. We'd be willing to pay more to make it not go away. And I think that Series A is about you're creating an immense amount of value for your customers, and you're starting to show repeatability in how you capture that value back. I think that's why the 1 million thing sticks out. It's just proof that you are creating enough value to capture some back. But I think people, talking to customers really is incredibly beneficial. And I think a lot of what is helpful in connecting the dots between those calls also is that there's some sort of repeatability in the value delivery, right? And in the problem. So it's not just like a fluke that you're solving one problem for one customer, a completely different problem for another for a third. And so this goes back to the kind of not all revenue is created equal. Like, we want to look for repeatability in the pain and the severity of that pain. And that, we also talk to people who are the right customer profile, but aren't your customers. And if we could have 4 or 5 calls where it's really consistent, this one thing's an absolute pain in the ass to get done, this company helped solve it. Or if a company like that did exist, for us to see pull from a non-customer to want to get an introduction is also, a really good sign. So I think like indifference is the last thing that we want to see, because it's so much easier to not do something than it is to do something. And buying and installing a new piece of software or technology is definitely it's a lift, and we look for kind of repeatability in what we're hearing in terms of what the problem was, how you're solving it, and the value that you're delivering.
Yeah, I'll give an example too. It's like the $1 million thing, to Brian's point. You could have gotten $1 million. It's a lazy way. It's almost like, it's not like you get like a coupon if you get $1 million of ARR that you could just trade in for your Series A. So it's just a quick mental heuristic sort of to say, okay, look, you've reached some level of scale, but you could actually not have reached that level of scale in a way that's repeatable. You just could be really good at selling things. But product market fit. So an example, I work for a company that created a verticalized CRM for hospitals, and hospitals a few years ago, when they were moving to, instead of fee for service, they were moving to value-based care. They wanted to attract the right type of sort of patients. They started to think of them as customers. So they had to go through marketing campaigns and try to drive volume through the door. And, we realized that we had product market fit when we could go into any hospital, right, that was sort of like of the size or scale that would need us. And we could talk to them about their pain. And we could say, look, the way the healthcare system's working now, it's because of Obamacare and a lot of things that were happening in the market. It's going to be more value-based. These are the types of patients that you're looking to get, better payer mix, different types of reimbursement models. We know the pain you're going through, and here's how we solve that. And it was fluent. And they got the story, and we got into a sales process because we were able to sort of like match up our product with the very acute thing that they thought about solving every single day. Right. And they were willing to give us money to solve that pain for them. You could feel it, like when it happened, right? We were all speaking the same language about sort of a critical problem they were trying to solve. And we were solving that through a product. And so I put some links in the chat here. Like, there's other ways to sort of think of it. It's a little bit of art. It's not purely science, and it's not always mechanical.
Keith, you had another question on product market fit, or what it feels like. I'll make sure we came back to that. You raised your hand.
Yeah, Lily, I was gonna, going back to that previous conversation, it was more about some of like the leading indicators being, it being easy to find interest at the top of the funnel, but right now it's difficult for us to accelerate the sales cycle. And so we're kind of in this in-between period. And perhaps, Jimmy, you might have gone through that in selling to hospitals. So how do you perhaps pull some of those deals forward? Again, this is a Series A, workshop, and not a sales one, but that's just some of my thoughts around, accelerating that and getting conviction deeper in the funnel, as well as how we time that with our next raise.
Yeah, we learned how to do it. For us, for example, we learned that it was a reference selling market. And just being able to say that, we weren't perfect at it by the time we did our Series A. We were just getting good enough to say, okay, it's a reference selling market. We're going to get a few early adopters, And then what we did from a marketing strategy was we made them sort of heroes in our story and their own story. So we actually had them speak at conferences and different things, and they lent credibility to what we were trying to do. But it's different in every market. But the point is, we had gone through that discovery and getting to the A. And then once we got there, we could tell investors, hey, look, now we need more capital to go do this again and again and again and again. And that's sort of, we had, the burden of proof was we had 4 or 5 customers that were willing to get on a soapbox and say, hey, look, this is awesome.
Yeah, I'd say in that type of industry, we've been, one of our companies that you guys know, Hi Marley, is insurance, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about volume of customers there, but showing that the pain point is very meaningful and you're uniquely solving that pain point. And then the story, we talk about promise versus proof. And if you can prove that you are solving a deep pain point, as Brian mapped out, I think the nice to have versus need to have is super important. And then you can sort of, you do a little more selling on the story of, but here's how big this market is and here's how we'll go get it. I think that can work particularly in sort of sleepy elephant hunting industries.
Yeah, just quickly, one thing on Keith's question too is, for the right investor too, it will also be a conversation about your understanding of the business and the market. And I think it's really important to have and shape that point of view around, look, we understand there's some level of seasonality in this market. Like, here's what we've learned. I think so much of going from sort of seed to A is optimizing yourself for learning and then putting those learnings back into the product and how you're going to market. And so I think for that, if things look lumpy and you're in an industry where that's just kind of normal, I think it's helpful to kind of get ahead of that, set the narrative, and then, be ready to sort of explain your point of view around it.
That's well said.
Thank you. Super helpful.
Tanya, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, I have a quick question around when investors ask about, and I know, Lily, this is near and dear to your heart, daily active users, monthly active users. Now, obviously, every SaaS app is like completely different than another one in a different industry. From your perspective, like, how do you judge? So if I say, is it a percentage of users? Like, how do you consider, oh, this is a very, sticky type product, people are using it actively. Let's say I have, 10,000 users and people were going in 2,000 times a week. Like, is that too little? Is that a lot? Like, how do you know from your perspective, or how do I tell a better story around this to show the usage, for example?
The annoying answer is it totally depends on the product. So there's some products, but the macro thing that we're trying to assess is, do we feel like people love this product and get value out of it? And there's going to, like that, again, it goes back to what Brian was saying, is that, are you solving a problem that creates value? And if something one of the manifestations of, yes, this creates value, is I will use the product. And so, and the appropriateness for that depends on what the product is and what it's doing. There's some products that might be appropriate to use, if I'm an individual user, if I use it once a week, that is indicative of it solving my pain point. There's some products that, like, I should be living in every day. And if I'm not, so for example, for a lot of, future of work or, vertical or functional SaaS applications, if I'm not, if I'm not doing my work in it every day, then am I really is it really valuable to me? If that's what it's intended for. So it totally depends on the product and the user and what is going to be compelling to show people love this product. They're coming to it for what it's intended to use, and it's creating value.
Mm-hmm. So it is subjective, and I guess I can paint the story over time as well. So obviously, you're probably looking for trends as more users are coming in. Is it dropping off? So it's more like general trends than some sort of, it's not like, I don't know, gross margins, for example. There's a benchmark.
So much of raising money is, though, about art and not science. Like, you are the masters of the industries that you're in, and people are looking to you to be the visionary. And so I think it's okay for you control the message, right? Like, what do you think about it? I want to know how you think about it. So regardless of how I interpret it, I think some things are mechanical, right? You can talk about like when you start to get in Series B raises and Series C raises, it is much more, there's so much more proof and there's so much more metrics driven stuff. I think at this stage, it's, okay, tell me how you have a toehold in the market that's super large, what you've learned, show me your history, and why is that really important? And tell me. And if I don't agree with you, you can challenge me. But I think that more than anything, you have to have the conviction and demonstrate the proof that you're onto something. And you can paint that through your own metrics. But, you know, we're generalist investors. We see so, you know, we go from agro tech to, you know, we see some like robot stuff. We've got hardware, we've got two-sided marketplaces, fintech, you know. So,
Yep.
you know, tell us and
And I
get us
think
really, really excited about it.
I have a question about that actually.
Yeah.
Go for
Can I
it.
jump in? A lot of what I'm seeing right now is like people are starting at very different places when of what they know about your industry. So like, you know, I'll meet with someone who knows pretty much nothing about this space. And then I've met with someone who literally before our first meeting sent me like a 30-page deck he made showing his entire thesis and how it aligns with the company. And like going into those meetings is so different because some people join the meeting and they're like, yes, I've literally been doing research on the space for years. These are all the things I believe. Like, and then some people are like, oh, I like this. I just have never, like, they've never thought about it. And it's such coming from such different places.
Yeah.
And like, do I make the decision to be like, okay, I'm going to get this. I like this investor. They have no idea what the space is. I'm going to get them up to speed, even though there's all these other people who have such a strong thesis because they've been studying the space. Like, how do you think about that? And is it worth taking the time? And like, how do you kind of get someone up to speed who hasn't had a strong thesis around the space yet?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think that that is part of the reason why the qualifying process is so important. And we'll talk a little bit about this. Like, I actually think the qualifying investor piece is a long time period. And then the I'm actively raising who's in my pipeline and how am I sort of shuffling that process is a different step to it. But in this qualifying, that's exactly what you want to tease out, Rebecca, is sort of how much do they know about the market? Do they believe, like, do we have sort of a shared vision on the thesis side of things? Again, I think in some ways it's easier if folks understand your market, or it'll be easier for you to communicate. Sometimes it can be harder because they can be more discerning because they know it really, really well. And sometimes they're looking for a very specific thing in the market. They're like, I've been studying this for years and I'm looking for this dot. And if you don't fit that dot, I'm not interested. So I think it's useful to, you know, the benefit is hopefully in one conversation, you can get a read of like, do you have a share? Like, are they excited about your specific area or not? And if they're not, don't waste your time. So I think the benefit of a very informed mind is that you can actually hopefully qualify in or out faster. And one of the pieces of advice in your qualifying conversations, A, both to help make your pipeline more efficient, and B, also to not sort of be in the back seat or, you know, be on the receiving end of all the questions, is sort of push it back on investors and say, where do you think the space is going? What are you excited about? What else have you looked at in this space? It's a way to get to know investors, not have to give away too much information about your business, and use it as a way to qualify them and kind of put them on the hot seat a little bit. Like when founders do it to me, it's a total power dynamic thing that I actually find pretty compelling, because then it makes me be on my toes being like, well, if I want a chance at this deal, I better have a pretty good informed mind on this. And so then the other part of your question was like, is it worth it spending time on people who don't know the space? I think it can be if you like the investor and you believe that they'll bring value in a different way. Because you can bring investors around the table that add different things. Some may add really deep domain expertise. Some may add really good go-to-market expertise or great people or whatever it is. So I don't think you have to disqualify people because they don't know, but then it will take a bit more work on your end to inform them of the space and why you are well positioned in the space. And you need to sort of allot for that in your timeline, which is why I also think the qualifying relationship building sort of teasers before you're officially starting matters. Because if you actually have everybody at the starting gate at the same time, but one is going to take 2 weeks to get smart on the industry and one will get it right away, you will automatically, your process will be out of sync.
So if you wanted to catch up on a space, what is most helpful that I could send to get someone up to speed on an industry?
Yeah, so I think, Brian, feel free to jump in on this. Like, I think I find it impressive when founders have done a ton of sort of landscaping of their market themselves and sort of say, here's how we see the world and here's where we fit in. So sort of here who else, here are some of the trends, here are some of the other players, here's why we're uniquely qualified to win this piece of it. And granted, obviously it's biased, but it's building your credibility in the space. Again, like if founders are sort of saying, oh, nobody else is playing here, or everybody else is so far away, like I actually not usually that compelled by that, because I either think you're either ignoring part of the market or you don't know it, which neither of those is a positive thing.
Can I ask a quick question about that in particular?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So I've been curious about this, is like, does it, like if you like flood it with potential competitors, even if they're kind of like ancillary to your specific business, like does that make it look too crowded? And like how you balance that out with being like a big market, a lot of people are going after it, which is a good thing, with like having like a narrow focus into what you specifically do and why you're positioned well to win.
Piggyback on that, how do you visualize that on a slide without like Ben saying, looking like too many people are going after the same thing and
having like 25
you're not going to be a winner
on one page?
Yeah.
I'll take the first part, and then maybe we'll kind of have the team take the slide part. I think the most important thing that good investors will look for is, if there are a range of other players, what is your opinion as a founder on why their approach is incorrect, right? Like, what's the kind of movement of the market, and why do you think the way you're going about it is both differentiated and right? So I think, sentences that are, hey, a lot of people think the problem is X and we actually think it's Y. And so here's why we're building, our company in the way that we are. I think that you are going to face, like, you'll definitely face investors who are, somewhat skeptical around, okay, is the insight that you have on the problem, if there are other people who are going after that same problem, what is it about how your opinion of the solution that is different from others? So I think being able to kind of articulate that, and again, like maybe you change the axes on your, the labels on the 2x2, so that like everyone else is in a completely different quadrant. And so, I'll give an example. Like at first round, or as before Underscore, we backed Looker. Looker's a BI tool bought by Google for about $3 billion. And if you look at like a BI landscape when Looker was raising their seed round or now, it's mind numbing. There's a million BI tools. And at the time, almost everyone was trying to make BI like no code, super visual, 10 times easier to use for the business user. And what they said was like, no, we think that's wrong. We actually think it needs to be harder to use. We think there's going to be a whole person in an organization that at the time they called the data guru. It's now the sort of, data analyst. And they were right? Like, and so I think the idea there is you just figure out what is it about the market and your approach that's different, or like maybe there are a bunch of other people who are solving the problem in X way and you think they're wrong. Like, I think it's just having a clear point of view around that.
I think that's right. And it has to be defensible, right? So, if you have to decide what your differentiation is. If it's a go-to-market thing, it's sort of less interesting because anyone can just repeat your go-to-market strategy. But let's say you have something like a data advantage, right? A data advantage is super defensible because other people have to have the same level of data at scale. I'm just throwing these things out. So whatever your secret sauce is and your approach to the market, I think, Brian, a lot of times we see this in a 2x2. And it's like, we're great, everyone else sucks, here's why. But it has to be something that is true. So to Rebecca, to your point, one of the things that you could do, you can tell people about the market first. And so they understand why your approach is unique. And I've seen people do this in two ways. They'll send you a Gartner report. Well, that's great. Hopefully you're on the Gartner report. When you're really sophisticated and mature, like when you are the thought leader in the market and you've written a bunch of things and you've got a bunch of stuff that you throw in a data room and you are seen as the thought leader, and you are actually pushing that content out and telling people, here's the market, and here's, you know, here's how we're going to take the market down, that's really powerful. So getting back to the education thing, you're going to have to educate people on the market. You're going to have to plan for that in the fundraising. When you talk about a crowded market, it's okay. I mean, there's every market's crowded in some sense, between incumbents and apathy and sort of like homegrown and a bunch of things you could do. But you have to sort of like clear the noise and talk about why what you have is defensible, and you're up in the upper right-hand quadrant, and everyone else is, you know, credibly not where you're at. But you need to tell people why.
Yeah. And one theme, I think, you know, and I know for a couple of your businesses is, you know, being purpose built for a certain part of the market, I think increasingly can be potentially compelling. So for example, we're seeing a lot in, you know, stuff being built for SMB that was sort of traditionally ignored. And it's not sort of a totally defensible for a very long time, but you can tell a pretty compelling story as to why something that's built for enterprise isn't going to come down. And then you have to tell the story as to why is this segment big enough? How are we going after it efficiently? And we're building our product specifically for this. So there's different ways to tell the story that again, it's another opportunity for you to showcase your expertise on the market and why, you know, you'll hear us at Underscore talk a lot about minimum viable segment, like being able to articulate that and what are the attributes and why are we finding traction with these attributes. We start with that, and then here's where we can grow over time. And I think you guys have probably seen our bottoms up market sizing article. If you haven't, it's a good one. But again, that can be another way how you tell the story of like, here's what we're doing differently. We're going after this piece, and this is why that's big enough to be interesting, and this is why we're uniquely positioned to go after this piece of the market.
And to build on that, like a point that has come up a couple times is, I think, having your own sort of firmly held point of view around the market and where the white space is, and maybe why your segment's being ignored, or like, I think to build on this, the other thing that investors will ask is, if there isn't anyone, why won't there be someone tomorrow or next month or next year? And you know, the more you have a unique point of view or a unique lived experience that brought you to the way you're solving the problem, you want to make sure you get that out there. I think, you know, most good investors should start with that. Like, that should be square one of your conversation of, why are you working on this and why do you think it's unsolved? And so if you don't have an investor leading you there right at the beginning, like, take them there and get ahead of it.
Yeah.
One just super quick note, the whole like competitive landscape thing, for a long time, my least favorite slide to put together was like that map.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, it felt like very counterintuitive, because it's like, I'm trying to build something different here, and I'm putting in these products that like I think are like fundamentally like wrong in some way. And I think what really the big unlock for me personally, at least, was like, this is not about like painting yourself necessarily. It's about like being able to have the conversation to highlight like these unique insights that you have about what makes you different than them, and why your unique approach and your unique insight is a source of opportunity. Like, basically, to me, like, the competitive landscape is like, everyone thinks this way, and this is why they build this way. Here's how we think differently. And like, for me, that's a lot easier to talk about, because it's like, it's way more fun than saying
Right.
like, no, we're not like this other product, and like basically defending yourself. Like, I don't know, it feels like, I guess, turn it from like a defensive thing into like an offensive thing.
Absolutely.
That's
I was
very
also
well said.
with like, kind of similarly to that point, is like, I don't know how I feel about like, if you have like the two axes and you put all the companies that are like, you know, similar to your space, and then you're up on the top right. And it's
Yeah.
like, I'm so much better than everybody else, and here's why, as opposed to saying like, maybe I'm not in the top right, but I'm like far on one side, and like, I'm fitting into like this part of the market, and like, that's why I'm going to dominate this part of the market, and that's why it's this big, and I'm going to move into the rest of it, kind of thing. So it's a similar sort of thing where you're not saying like, hey, I'm the best and all these guys suck, but you're saying like, this is where we fit, and this is what we do incredibly well, and it's kind of this piece of the market. I don't know. We were kind of trending that way a little bit.
Yeah.
That's fine too. Yeah, when I said that, like, I mean, we see the 2x2 a lot. Like a lot of people take that approach, but it's less about the slideware. It's more about the narrative and the story, and you mastering that and sort of like teaching. Right, people are looking to you and your team to be the visionaries in the space, and so it's okay to challenge the status quo, to challenge what people's firmly held beliefs are, and you sort of set the guideposts for what the market could be based on your vision, your product, your team, etc. That's powerful.
I love the way Luke just said it, is turn it into an opportunity to showcase your positioning and why it's unique rather than playing defense.
And I think also there's an opportunity, so it's John here, there's an opportunity when you tell the story about why you founded the company, what is the unique thing, that the problem you're trying to solve and why, it's actually a good opportunity to talk about other products that either you used or companies used, etc., and why you're building your solution different, and why you're going to create a unique advantage. And you kind of get ahead of the conversation when they want to get to competition or what have you. And you can say, well, as I was saying in my founding discussion, da 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 da. So you come across with an enormous amount of credibility on that, because you're weaving the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, John, one thing that we are always impressed by when we think the market's crowded and we talk to a founder about it, if we can learn about, people that we thought were competitors, and if the founder has a much better understanding of those competitors than we may have had, I think it's just having a really strong point of view, having a deep understanding of who else is around, and, bonus points if you've gone and talked to folks who use those perceived competitors, either if you've replaced them, been used instead of them, or on top of them. But we always look for, does this founder have a better sense of the market than we do? Because, Rebecca, I think building on your point of what, even thesis-driven investors, like, it's probably a bad sign. Like, they still want you to know more about the market than like, them sitting in a room thinking about it. Like, I want to make sure I take a second to address one of your earlier questions of, okay, you're talking to an investor that's super thesis driven. Maybe they've already come up with an opinion on the market. That opinion could be really wrong, right? And so that's a whole thing. But I think for catching the non-thesis driven investors up to speed, like, look, there are great investors who are thesis driven. There are great investors who are non-thesis driven. If you want to be non-thesis driven and great, you need to be great at getting up to speed fast. And so I would be paying attention to their ability to do that. And, normally what that looks like is they go and talk to people who are the profile of your customers, or they want to talk to your customers immediately. And they tend to be really good at listening and learning quickly. And if someone is kind of non-thesis and not doing that, like, maybe don't spend time with them.
Yeah, that's a good segue. I know we have about 5 minutes left. Maybe we'll just touch on very quickly some other parts of the process just to keep in mind, and then we'll dive into some more of the specifics of running a process in our next section, if that works. But just some high level, very simple things. But I do think picking your timing matters, and what I mean by that is both sort of where you are in your company evolution. Is there a moment of momentum? We do talk about you can raise on promise, you can raise on proof, you can raise on a combo. So maybe you have proof in 2 of the 4 buckets we just talked about. You have a killer team and a great product, and you're telling this promise part of the go-to-market and for the other pieces. But you do want to pick your timing around that and where you are relative to your milestones. You also ideally want to do it when you have plenty of cash. And when I say plenty of cash, I think 4 to 6 months. Jamie or Brian, if anybody has a different opinion, but if you have 1 month left, it does not put you in a position of strength. And so, to the extent that you can line up those 2 things of momentum and a good enough story and enough cash that you're coming from a position of strength, that is kind of ideal. And then the other thing that we talked about is sort of, actually running a process. And it really is like a sales process. And the ones where I've seen this done, the qualifying stage, I kind of genuinely think is sort of 4 to 6 months. And whether it's through your monthly investor updates, or as you start to get to know people, doing some of those qualifying conversations, Rebecca, as you said, of getting to know people, do they have a point of view on the space? In that process, they're getting to know you, you're getting to know them. And ideally what you want to end up with, and we'll talk about it in more detail, sort of what is your short list that when you say, okay, I'm turning the switch now, I'm actively raising, what does that look like? Who's there on the starting gate, and how do you sort of run as much of a streamlined, true process as possible? Because then that is what gives you levers to create forcing functions. So the opposite of this is sort of a slow drip over many months with different investors in different stages that doesn't amount to a competitive forcing function, FOMO creating, and I don't love that word, but the concept there is sort of the right sentiment, which is like ideally you want people roughly in the right, or in a genuinely aligned stage, which is super hard to do. To your point, I think it was Luke who said, like, I got some people hovering who are already informed, I've got insiders, I've got some people new I want to get involved. How do I corral all those people? I say ideally you want to do that corralling in what I call the qualifying stage, which is sort of building your list. And then you have folks kind of roughly in a similar zone when you go to the starting gates and you're actively raising.
Yeah, and just to follow on with what Lily said, earlier someone said you heard advice where people said, someone was suggesting that you don't have to run a process, or that the best processes aren't really a process. I would say, I'll just use an example of Coda, one of our companies that, they could raise money every day if they wanted to, based on who the founders are and what they're doing. But, they got a ton of inbound, right? All the time. But every time that they've raised since we've been a part of that company, they basically say, okay, all of you people that have, reached out, we are going to open a data room. We are going to look to make final decisions, 1 month from now. And here's the criteria for who we're looking for these for like our next investor, et cetera, et cetera. And that got everyone working, according to a time frame that created, one, FOMO, two, put urgency on it, and fast failed. Frankly, people are like, I can't meet that timeline, I'm out. Then you don't waste time with them. But when you're just having conversations and it's like a slow rolling thunder sort of process, you get all out of whack. You'll get your first term sheet, and then 3 weeks later, you're still trying to get another term sheet and you lose the first. You really want to create some level of like synchronicity if you can.
So next session, we'll dig into running a streamlined process. So we touched on a lot of the themes today, but we'll get more in depth. But thank you all for joining. If you have feedback, please let us know. If you have more questions that come up, also let us know so we can integrate that into future sessions. Again, the goal is to be helpful and to help you guys and answer the questions that you have.